I'm informed that we're in business again. I would like Alex to repeat his last question, and I think we'll say that that's the last question. Inez has brought the slides you requested of Fort Ross, and she says they take about 15 minutes, so we have just enough time to squeeze them in before lunch.
I'm just very quickly, since we're talking about education, I don't know if people realize that for 50 years that the United States government was not concerned with the education in Alaska, and it was not till about 1916 that the first federal school system, it was called the federal school system, started here in Kenai. It was dependent on the Russian education system, and it was beyond just the church teaching. It was, they taught other subjects, yes. Geography, arithmetic, and commerce,
English,
and I think that, and so consequently, the people even lost their own culture here because the language that was taught. That's the reason in this area it's very difficult to identify anything, to have anything written, is the fact that they actually lived a Russian culture for many years. And so that's...
Oh, thank you, Alex. Are we ready for the slides? What? Can you put down this?
Yeah, they're going to go do that right now.
Okay. How long is that going to take?
Just a few seconds. See, they're already back there now. They don't know where to... Okay, you want to use this mic? Okay. Is that one now?
Yes, I think so. Well, this one is okay. These are a group of slides taken through a series of years from approximately 1823 to 1950. Unfortunately, the first two slides are rather dark. I think you could, can you bring it up a little bit? It does appear. There's a... No, I have dark glasses on because I can't see without them. This is one of the first drawings of Fort Ross. This was done in 1823. It shows the chapel, the commander's house, the fence around, or the stockade, and the two blockhouses at either end. And then the Erie and Indians on the outside. Next, please. Turn to the next one now. This one isn't. This too, this was done in approximately 1841. It shows a better representation of, again, the blockhouse, the chapel, and the villages on the outside. Next. Another view. Next. This particular picture is a sort of an artistic view of what Ross may have looked like, with one exception that the village houses appear on the opposite bank. They should have been on the bank next to the fort. This particular fort is similar in many aspects to the Russian forts in Alaska. Next, please. Another view. This was taken a little later, in 1843, just shortly after the Russians left California. The outbuildings are now in ruin, but the interior buildings are still intact, including the chapel, the commander's house, the officers' barracks, and warehouses here, and the blockhouses on either corner. And the cemetery is here across the creek again, which is in a true position. Next. Another view taken from the ocean, looking up. Next. The oldest photograph. This was done approximately 1870, 1860, 1870, somewhere around there. Next.
We need to have moved a red Dodge pickup crew cab
Another view. Next.
058. Person has to go to work. Red Dodge pickup.
These are a series of pictures just from the beach. Next. Another picture. Similar. This is taken looking out to sea. A little later, in 1898. The blockhouse is beginning to deteriorate. The chapel is still intact. Next. Another further looking out to sea on one of the hills behind Ross. This was taken shortly after the earthquake of 1906. The chapel is now collapsed. Next. Another picture. By the way, these are all back. That doesn't make. That one was. This one's all right. The chapel, as it stood before restoration and before it was burned, or before restoration in 1948. Next. One of the gates. Next. The interior of the gate. Next. The chapel here. Next. Next. I get my, I'm not used to them this way. This is the officers' quarters, now being used as part of the hotel that Bennett's had built or had used after he came to or bought Ross. Next. Another view of the officers' quarters. Another view that's more like a pig pen here. One of the warehouses, which is believed to be Russian. Next. The commander's house, which is the Fort House, here is the Fort Ross Hotel. Next. This is a restored commander's house of 1949. Next. During restoration, all the siding had been taken off the Fort Ross Hotel, and this is what was underneath. Good, solid Russian architecture, log architecture. Next. Here's one of the corner log. This was reconstructed, showing how they went about restoring, or these are all new logs here, but in restoring, in the 48 work, they had to use all the old-time tools that the Russians had to use. They couldn't use any modern tools at all on this. Next. This is upside down. I mean, this was what was considered William Bent's old barn. The similar log construction, or end log construction, as you can see at the top. Unfortunately, it's This is the top, and that's the bottom. The chapel as it stood before the 48 restoration, showing the 4 windows instead of the original 3 windows. Next. This is before the earthquake, showing the 3 windows. Next. Another picture of the chapel. Next. Another picture. And this happened after the 1906 earthquake. And as you notice, we've got a long cross up there. Next, please. Interior, showing the roof toe join. Next. This is an Alaska church, another one, which are similar. Next, please. Which are similar in certain aspects to the chapel at Ross. Next, please. This was taken in Sitka in 1913, showing the vestments of the church. Next, please. The blockhouse, the northeast blockhouse, is known after restoration in 48. Next, please. The deterioration of the same blockhouse. Next, please. This was this is out of sequence. This should have been first, showing the gradual disintegration of the blockhouse. Next, please. Further disintegration. Next. Next, please. This is the southeast blockhouse. Next, please. Next, please. After the earthquake. Next, please. Showing, wait. This is one of the original portals. Next, please. A similar view, showing one of the original portals. Apparently, there was one gun that was left at Ross. Sutter took this to Sutter's Fort. Later, it went into battle with the Americans at the Battle of San Pascual in San Diego, and finally had its home at the Pioneers Museum in San Francisco before the earthquake and fire, where it melted or disintegrated from fire. Next, please. This was the only shot of the cannon as it stood before the Pioneers Museum. Next. The apple orchard, Russian apple orchard. Another picture of the apple orchard. This was a cherry orchard. In 48, before any work was done on the cemetery, this is the only thing that was left. There were 2 of these, this particular type of grave. These were blocks of wood in square logs piled on top of each other. And apparently, when a man by the name of Rufus came here with Bennett's, he gave a very good description that these particular graves, at that time there were 60 of these, said that a majority of them had a roof over the top of them. Next, please. Another picture, the same thing. Area graves on the chain. Next, please. These were some points that were found on Farallon Islands indicating that there were aliens that had been out on the southwest Farallones or had a camp out on the Farallon Islands. We did find it and found that the accumulation of shell and midden was approximately 10 inches thick. And I think that's all. Yes. I'm sorry they had to be... I'm sorry they had to be all upside down, but one of those things.
End of Russian experience, beginning American experience, Friday, November 8th.
The American experience, and Barry Phillips is in charge or chairman of the American experience. Before she begins, though, I'd like to go on record of saying 181 people have signed our guest book. So therefore, at least 181 people have been in and out of the conference. It's probably just a few more that did not sign the guest book. They were here for just a short period of time. Mary?
Are these live? Wow. I think I can reach the back of that. You know, back there. Okay. Well, perhaps we should each have one anyway. I was going to suggest that if I want to tell the whole story of our participation in this conference, I should just raise this tote bag up and hold it upside down and let everything fall where it will. Because it really doesn't make much difference. You would understand what I'm talking about, perhaps, if I say that I'm sure no one, if they stop to think of it, would want to take care of the American experience. How would you like to take care of the American experience and come down here and say wise and sharp and make statements to the point that would be preserved for posterity with people like Morgan Sherwood and his, oh, let's see, something should be sticking out, hey, right here, with all these things that he's published. I knew it was around someplace. All these things. How would you like to get up here and talk about the American experience with that man sitting here? He has done some marvelous things. And one of the things that I like about Morgan's work is that there's a little twerk. You know, here you go along, you read all these serious things, marvelous things. You know they're historically accurate. You know this is something that you want preserved and you want to make your own. And then you come along and here you are, and you smile. And that's been my experience with Morgan's writings, and I've appreciated it. How would you like to do the American experience? You know, since the purchase, with people like Klaus Naschke. Klaus Naschke, who has been awarded the marvelous grant, the marvelous honor for writing the biography of Bob Bartlett. One thing, and he has written the interpretative history of Alaska statehood. How would you like to sit here in this chair next to this fine historian?
You're putting it on.
No, I'm not. One iota. But I'm going to say something else about Klaus. In this book of his, and if you haven't read it, you should. In this book of his, I like to start at the front or the back. It doesn't matter just which. Take it as it comes. I started at the front in his book, and I came to one of those front pages that tells so much. And he had written the book for his parents who live in West Germany. He doesn't know I noticed that. But I thought, he is so wise, he's so sharp, he's such a wonderful historian. But when I saw that bit of sentiment and that honor that he paid his parents, I thought, I won't be as scared of him anymore.
Well, not all that formidable, actually.
Aren't you really? Well, I should have some specs here someplace, should I not? And maybe I'm not sure that I need them. Does anybody, hey, where are the kids? All my students are supposed to keep track of pens and notebooks and specs for me. Some of them are sitting here, and they know this to be true years ago, before they grew up. I know that in looking out over this audience, I was scared. Yesterday morning at 8:45, I was flat scared because there were just a few here and a few there. Then all at once something happened, and this place filled up. It not only filled up with people, you, but it filled up with participating people. And that's what pleases us all. That challenges us to reach down, to throw away the notes. You're afraid to look down anyway. Because out here sit all of these people with the fine attention they've given all of our participants since this seminar began. And we feel that there isn't a chance of our being able to give you back as much as you deserve. Because you, the audience, the participating audience, you're the ones that make us want to put out the very best we have. And this has been so evident, your part in it, ever since this seminar began. And I know that when all of these people begin talking, there won't be time to tell you how much we all appreciate it. But this has been such an important part, your part, in the seminar. As far as the introductory part's concerned, I really don't know. See all those things? They don't mean a thing. These things, I think, do. Little scribblings I did while I listened to you folks this morning participate with the question and the discussion points that you were able to bring out. I jotted down things. I haven't any idea what they are, except I said I was scared. Do you ever stop to think that everyone is to a point until you realize the people that you're dealing with? In coming to Kenai on Statehood Day, a day when they were voting for statehood, let us say, August 26, 1958. Now that was a Kenai. Of course, everybody was up at the inlet, between the Inlet Cafe and the Inlet Bar, listening to the returns of the election, because everybody in the country wanted to be representative in the first state legislature. Alan Peterson was the victor that day. But it seemed to me it was this law. I didn't know anybody's name on it, but I know them now. This was a day when Kenai was a village full of people, and living here to watch the changes and watch the additions, the people who were here are no less people than they were that day. They just had new things come, new experiences, and sometimes it sets the old Kenai residents aback a bit. But they care about this area. Their ancestors cared about this area. And their children and their grandchildren today care about this area. And so do the people who have come since 1958. They care. But there was a while there that people were scared. We had the military, and the colonel's wife told me one day, of course we were all a little in awe of the CO, because they were sort of apart. We didn't know them. That's the secret. We didn't know them. The colonel's wife told me one day, you know what we do? When my husband gets out of uniform, we drive up and down the streets of Kenai. And we just flat look in people's windows as we drive by. We like to see that here is a village full of homes with people who enjoy being in their homes with their families. And we do wish that some of these people would invite us into their homes to share with them. And you know, I think everybody in town, including me, including all the other teachers, we would have been scared. We would have been reticent, reluctant to have dared ask the CO's family to be our guest. Do you see what happens? When the oil people came, Mina Sample was teaching. Bud Dyes came then, and the oil people came out to Swanson River, and Mr. Sample was out there. And she was quite a gal. But she'd get so mad. Let's see. Yeah, here they are. She'd get so mad because she'd say, nobody here likes us. That would be just 5 minutes of an hour and maybe a week or so. Because she'd say, do you know what those fish and wildlife people, those moose range people, some of my best friends sitting over there, truly, do you know what they require? They don't like us. Every teaspoonful of muck that comes up out of those wells out there on Swanson River, we've got to pick it up and put it over in a specially designated place. You see, what we need is understanding. We've been hearing, and we've been listening, and we've been seeing all these wonderful people here, yesterday and today. But what we still need to remember, that we may all be different. We may all have different jobs. We all are interested in Kenai. We are all interested in Alaska history. And we all want to be a part in furthering a real history of Alaska. Little Deacon Ivanov. He wasn't a deacon. He was just a little man. But he wanted to be a deacon, and he went out to Seattle. And then he went to Sitka. He came back a little deacon. And he's no longer living, but a lot of his people are. He taught me so many things, that little man did. So many things. And yet he was very reluctant to become a part or to intrude. He was a shy little man, but so much he could teach. Mary Nissen, how much she has to share with us. But it isn't only these people. I'm looking all around, and I'm going to put it in. See, I had beautiful notes, and I haven't got to use any of them. But if I could just make you see that everyone out in here and everyone out here on the street, how important they are. Every one of you, every one of them is important to Kenai area and to Alaska. I say area because we have Nanilchik and Clam Gulch and Kasilof and so on. Anchor Point. And brother, it took some doing to get Anchor Point here today. We couldn't, you should try their telephones sometime. We had permission from the big boy that said, you may go, we'll cover you with a substitute. But that took some doing to tell John Jones he's free to come, but he should have been here all day yesterday. Make the effort. Phil Ames, you could just call you all off. I heard Carolyn Hundorf's name. I've been trying to reach her for I don't know how long. I'm crazy about her kids, too. T-O-O, two. Carolyn's taught me a lot. We met fighting over which is the better set of encyclopedia. See, this is Alaska. This is the Kenai area. You can fight over anything in the world and love each other when you get through fighting. And they better love me as much as I love them. But if they don't tell me. Now, perhaps we'll have a chance to talk some more, and I might look at these and see what's here. But now, I want you to have a chance to hear the people you came to hear. And they elected, and I'm glad, to get rid of the aloneness that that big monstrosity represented, and that we would sit at the table to be joined later by a lot of other people who are here, and are going to be up here where you can look at them and ask them questions and see them when they talk back to you. Give them a hard time, if you will. They're Alaskans. They're Kenai people. They'll meet the challenge. On my left is Klosnashki, and beyond is the man who, he belongs to us too. Halibut Cove? Anybody who lives at Halibut Cove part of the year is bound to belong to us. Dr. Morgan Sherwood with that whole bunches of things. You should see what all he's done in history, and then you would understand why, frankly, I'm just scared, but not speechless. You are not. They've talked this over. So I give them the floor and the microphone, and I'm sure that they will tell you what they have in mind and put themselves at your disposal. And I think that you're going to, you showed us this morning, you want to participate. You're going to have a chance.
Yesterday in his opening remarks, Morgan talked about, or he provided a point of departure, a framework. He was talking about the how did it happen, why did it happen, and the so whats. And I have elected to take a few minutes and talk about the so whats, the things that might have been, and schemes that didn't amount to anything. In 1969, I had the good fortune to work in the National Archives in Washington, and deep in the bowels of this building, there's a little fellow by the name of Virgil Bow. This fellow has spent, I don't know how many years, 30-some years, he's retired now, in the National Archives as an Alaskan specialist. And he helped me a great deal find my way in some of the Alaskan material. And in the process of looking at various folders, I ran across a number of very interesting little stories that were concerned with immigration schemes to Alaska. Now, all of you know that in the 1930s, the Matanuska Valley achieved fame when the Roosevelt administration decided to settle some 202 families in the valley, people who were taken from Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan. And even before these people arrived in 1935, there were a number of other schemes of various groups of individuals who were interested in settling in Alaska, either in the Matanuska Valley or on the Kenai Peninsula. In the very early 1930s, a group of some 5,000 Russian peasants appealed to the Right Reverend Bishop Antonin of Alaska and asked him to intercede in their behalf for a settlement opportunity either in the Matanuska Valley or on the Kenai Peninsula. This group of some 5,000 settlers were supposed to go to Paraguay, and the possibility or the prospect of spending the rest of their lives in the tropical forests of that country didn't appeal to them. And so they asked Antonin to intercede for them. The bishop did. He asked the Department of the Interior whether or not any possibilities existed. Some correspondence ensued. Nothing happened. In the mid-1930s, there was still another group of people that called themselves the Korean People's Freedom League. They were hundreds strong. I never found out how many exactly. And these people appealed to the Department of the Interior, the great landlord in Alaska, to provide them with a home in the territory. The rationale was that being peasants, being suited for heavy colonial work or pioneering work, they would make a go of it. Not only that, but they also would be able to somehow protect the United States from Japanese aggression. And the Koreans thought in the 1930s that there might be a conflict between the United States and Japan. Not much came of this scheme either. In 1935, a group of some 2,000 blacks located in Cleveland, Ohio, they were called themselves the United Congo Improvement Association, appealed to President Roosevelt and to the Department of the Interior for settlement areas in Alaska. They considered, again, the valley or the Kenai Peninsula. And this is a particularly interesting story because the Department of the Interior and government circles generally believed at that point that only people who were born in northern latitudes, who perhaps had, as many expressed it, the hardy Scandinavian stock or northern European stock, the blue-eyed blonde individuals, would be suitable for settlement schemes in Alaska. So this group of blacks was given what I consider a royal runaround. They were sent from agency to agency. Eventually, they wrote to Eleanor Roosevelt, who was known to intercede with her husband in behalf of various minority groups. And finally, in 1939, they wrote to 1938, rather, they wrote to Greening, Ernest Greening, who was a director of the Division of Territories and Island Possessions, and asked him if they would be allowed to undertake a reconnaissance survey of the Kenai Peninsula. What they asked the government to do was to provide transportation and army tents and rations for a summer. Greening wrote back and said that, lo and behold, the federal government had the same intention, and it was going to dispatch the United States government surveyors to the Kenai Peninsula that very summer, and therefore the intention or these people would not be needed. The very next year, the United Congo Improvement Association wrote again, got in touch with these people, and Greening replied and said, well, unfortunately, the appropriation had been cut out, and no government surveyors had landed in the Kenai Peninsula, and the agricultural survey, which had been contemplated, had not taken place. Nothing further was heard from this particular group of people. In the late 1930s, the persecution of the Jews in Germany became extremely severe, and more German Jews who were able to escape Germany went to France, and they went to Switzerland, to the United States. And finally, in the late 1930s, there was a world conference in France to deal with the international refugee problem. And in the late 1930s as well, Representative Buckley from New York introduced a resolution which was designed to relax American immigration laws and allow various European refugees to settle in the United States. 2 years later, in 1940, Senator King and Representative Havana introduced the so-called King-Havana Bill, which provided for the settlement of Alaska by European refugees. And these European refugees were to be settled in a variety of places. The Matanuska Valley was one. The Kenai Peninsula was a second place, and various locations in the interior as well. One of the plans was to take or buy some of the hot springs scattered throughout Alaska and try to rescue some of the European physicians at these various spas in Europe. There were Jewish doctors, for the most part, Jewish personnel, and try to build up similar institutions in Alaska. The Alaskan reaction to these the settlement of Jewish people in Alaska was very unfortunate, I think, racially or religiously biased. Newspapers account from the late 1930s, 1939, 1940, 41, the Anchorage Daily Times, for instance, some very disgraceful, I consider very disgraceful editorials, which pointed out that the Jews, or Jews generally, never had worked with their hands. They always made a living with their head. They would be totally unsuited to colonial or pioneering type work in Alaska. That a large group of individuals, such as the Jews would be, would find it very difficult to integrate themselves into the Alaskan scheme of things. Tony Diamond, who was our delegate to Congress at that point, did his part in Washington to discourage any such schemes. And of course, by 1940, 1941, the problem solved itself in Europe, and Europe went to war, and a good proportion of the Jews finally were shipped off to the concentration camps and gassed. After the war, there were a number of other settlement schemes that were proposed. One, those of you who are World War II buffs probably remember that after Poland surrendered in 1939, after the short few weeks of war, many free Poles, so-called free Poles, the Polish government in exile, moved to London. There were two governments, the Lublin or the Russian Polish government in exile and the London Poles. And subsequently, then during the war, there was a Polish Legion, which these people fought in British uniforms on the British side in various theaters throughout the world. After the war, after the Lublin or the Russian Poles won out, Russia, or Poland rather, became a satellite of the Soviet Union. These people found it impossible to return to their homeland, and the question arose what to do with this rather large group of people. I think they were talking some in the neighborhood of some 90,000 men. And again, a proposal was made that the Polish Legion should be settled in Alaska. In this case, of course, you dealt with a very varied group, people who were officers, intellectuals, soldiers, peasants, artisans, craftsmen, and so on. And nothing came of this proposal either. And then there were a number of other proposals, one, for instance, to settle Finns, a number of Finns who had been displaced during the war in Alaska as well. These people particularly would be suited, many Alaskans thought. Morgan and I, and these are the framework that he provided. How did it happen, why, and the so whats. These are all historical or marginal footnotes, really. Nothing ever happened. These are the might-have-beens of history, and one really is not that concerned with these. But talking with Morgan, we became interested in various groups who have settled in Alaska. And we thought, for instance, about the Finns who have settled in Alaska, the Lapps, the Norwegians who have settled in Petersburg. And we like to get your opinion. We'd like to ask you if you have thought about research possibilities, or if you know of any depositories, any sources where information can be found. Morgan has probably some other groups that you might mention.
I'm afraid to talk. I really am, Mary. There's one thing you should understand about the institution where I work. I was explaining it to Klaus just before we walked up here. We aren't necessarily paid to talk. We're paid to research. It's a teaching and research institution, but and anyway, I've already had one set of butterflies for this conference. I don't see why I should have another. I'll try to point us in the same direction that Klaus began to point us. His interests are slightly different than mine. He is interested in political and social history and the question of special settlements or unique attempts to settle parts of Alaska and the Kenai Peninsula would interest him, say, more than would interest me. For example, among things that need to be done and need to be researched is the business history of Alaska. Nobody has ever written an economic history of Alaska or a business history of Alaska. Nobody has really researched, for example, the career of Cap Lathrop, who is an important person in the history of the Kenai as well as in the history of Central Alaska. A couple of years ago, Ed James, who edits the Dictionary of American Biography, asked me if I wanted to do a biography of Cap Lathrop, and to my knowledge, no I don't think any Alaskan is in the Dictionary of American Biography. This is not a who's who, one of those vanity things. It's a very respectable research tool. Important people in America's past are chosen by, well, I'm not sure how they're chosen, actually. And historians and practicing historians, professional and amateur, are asked to prepare articles of greater or lesser length for the DOB. And so I said, yeah, I'd do it if I could find enough material, enough documentary material about Cap Lathrop, because he was an interesting character and an important character in the history of the state. But then, upon my arrival in Anchorage, I visited another old classmate. You must think I have classmates all over the all over the state. Another classmate in Anchorage, and learned that all the business records and private records, if there are any, Lathrop's private records had been destroyed or somehow scattered, and I had to beg off the assignment, and I think that's a shame, because I think there are a lot of significant Alaskans who deserve an article in an important and significant research tool like the Dictionary of American Biography. Phil Allen this morning, speaking still about the need for a history, business history of the Kenai, or of Alaska, or of any part of Alaska. Phil Allen this morning introduced what I thought was a very stimulating interpretation of the role of the shopkeeper in Kenai frontier villages. I think it probably could be applied if someone to other frontier villages in Alaska. I'm not certain about that. It would depend upon the transportation facilities and the like. What a fascinating study that would make. The role of the shopkeeper in frontier Alaska, how he influenced the course of history locally, who are the good shopkeepers and who are the bad guys like Ryan. Oh, and by the way, well, no, I won't say that. So that, for example, I think is a real need and something that you can research yourself. I don't intend to do that. Another thing I'm interested in that Klaus perhaps is less interested in because he's more humane than I am, I'm interested in the history of things. When you think of the history of the Kenai, or the history of Alaska, or the history of anything, you need not always think in terms of social institutions. You can think of things, right? Nobody's done a history of fishing gear used in the Kenai. What kinds of gears were available? What kinds of fishing technologies were available over time? How did that affect the population, for example, of Kenai? How did that affect the prosperity of the fishermen and so forth? So the history of things should also interest those of you who are like me, interested in everything, of course, but not necessarily political or social institutions. Okay, these are a couple of the things that I think could be investigated, but it's not my business to tell you what I think should be done, to tell you that you should do my thing, or it is my business, I suppose, to encourage you to do your and I think that's about the way the panel should turn now. I think we would like to hear what kinds of topics you would like to investigate or have already started to investigate. Maybe we can help point you towards sources. Maybe we can tell you how to help you develop the framework of your research project, if you have one. And don't be modest about this. You need not really take Toynbee's answer to that question. What is the meaning of life? What was it to love, to create, to understand? I was very sorry that Bob used Toynbee instead of my own answer to that question, which I gave to him at a local pub last night. And my answer was simply to live happily ever after and departing, leave behind you footnotes in the sands of time. That's a sufficient significance. Well, I would like to know what projects are you interested in? What kinds of questions would you like to ask us about the American period? Because we can't possibly cover all aspects of the American experience. And then, after we hear some of your questions, maybe we can address ourselves again to what we and you are the significant issues in the history of this region. Any questions?
We have a hand back there.
The period after 1867, after the purchase, it seemed like a dark period, and like in Kodiak, there's just nothing that we can turn to that tells us very much about it. When people are investigating about that Braniff building, there's just a dark time there that we don't know anything about. How should we find out something about it?
Well, I'm sure Klaus has some answers to this, and Mary, no doubt, too. One excellent source about what was going on in Kodiak are the customs records. I'm not certain right now where the customs records for Kodiak are. They may be in Juneau, they may be in Seattle, they may be in Washington in the National Archives. And I'm not sure whether they've been inventoried yet, but I think some of them have. I'm just not certain about that. But customs records are an excellent source of who came where, even people who were going to and from Kodiak at the time, the status of the economy of Kodiak, and the like. Any government agency that touched Kodiak during that time will have produced some record or the other. Now, I realize these records are difficult for you to get a hold of, but if the records of that particular agency has been inventoried by the National Archives, then you can request that inventory. What agency would you? The Treasury Department. Now, write to the National Archives, ask them whether Treasury Department records for Alaska have been inventoried, what are available on microfilm. When you receive the inventory, if there is one, there's one for the Coast Guard. I'm not sure there's one for the Customs Service. Then look through it for the kinds of information you want to learn, the kinds of things you want to learn, and then you can write to the archives also, and for what has become less than a nominal fee nowadays, I regret to say, but for a fairly reasonable fee, you can get such documents microfilmed and sent, or photographs, Xerox for that matter. That's one way to get at some of the information for that period. Klaus, do you want to add anything to that?
I might add that the commercial companies which operated in Kodiak should have some information as well. Now, again, I'm not quite certain where this would be obtainable. Some of these records, I know some universities, for instance, the University of Washington has acquired very extensive commercial records relating to early Alaskan traders. These requests were made by various people who had Seattle as their operating base, and as you know, much of Alaskan commerce, particularly in the late 19th century and certainly within the 20th century, has been headquartered in Seattle. And many of the papers have found their way into these archives. But as Morgan pointed out, the various federal record centers, I think there are 11 now, and the National Archives. The National Archives has had a microfilming service for quite some time. And if these records are indexed, then the archives, the National Archives in Washington, are more than happy to provide the microfilming service for you for a fee which is actually reasonable. A second possibility, which has developed within the last few years, is that the federal record centers have also, on a much more limited scale, developed reproduction facilities, particularly filming. And I know that many of the governmental records, for instance, pertaining to Alaska, are found, well, let's say the governor's papers, for instance, from 1884 to 1958, at the present are stored in the Federal Record Center in Sandpoint Way in Seattle. Now, they are supposed to come back to Alaska as soon as the state has built a fireproof archives, which, where we can take care in a proper fashion of these records. But I do know that they have developed a rather crude inventory, and that they are willing and happy within their capabilities of providing you with copies of these various things. And I'm sure that you might want to write to the Federal Record Center in Seattle and ask them if there are any governmental records, the Treasury, for instance, there might be some records in there, or if there's anything in the governor's papers themselves relating to Kodiak. I think somebody had...
May I just add one? May I? Hello?
May I just add one thing?
Klaus reminded me when you mentioned the Alaska Commercial Company records. Wendell Oswalt did an inventory of the Alaska Commercial Company records at the University of Alaska, and I think the university would provide you with a copy of that inventory.
Yeah.
If you ask if they still have any, there are other Alaska Commercial Company papers. There are some in the California Historical Society, but they are, I don't think you'd find them very interesting. They're expurgated minutes of the board of directors. They're not very revealing. There are a great many records of the Alaska Commercial Company in the basement of the business education building at Stanford. Old boxes full of invoices, which they tried to give to me a few years ago when I went in there. I don't know how valuable these would be for you. I don't know how many of these records are about Kodiak, but the place to start in this case would be with that inventory by Wendell Oswalt of Alaska Commercial Company records at the University of Alaska.
And as a part of one of these volumes that have been reprinted and distributed, they mention that when the Erskine people turned a lot of the material to the university, and to the rest of the records, that there seem to be many boxes of it missing. And probably, I noticed that Bob today at the luncheon mentioned this business discover. And it doesn't matter what angle of Alaska history that you become involved in, remember that word, because so much isn't known. And lots of times you know all of the things that these people have done, you think, well, they have all of the answers. But there are a lot of varied ones, aren't there? And they had hoped that maybe Sister Victoria down here in Kodiak will be right in a position where, I don't know whether, I expect she has all she can do with the marvelous job she's doing with this Orthodox Alaska and reproducing all these things. But I'm rather intrigued with the idea of this business bit, and some of the most interesting things come out of it. I won't go into that any farther because someone's hand was up.
Yeah, sure.
I have a question. Could you say a few comments on what you think the long-term impacts may be of such new societies on the Kenai Peninsula as the group of old believers who are now located near Anchor River?
Well, this, you're aware that the settlement of the old believers is a fairly recent one. I'm not particularly familiar. The only thing I can think of right now is having read an article in the National Geographic magazine some years back, which alerted me to the existence of this particular group here. As far as the significance is concerned, I imagine that it just, it contributes to the diversity of life on the Kenai Peninsula. I think that certainly, okay, that brings up a number of points that both Morgan and I wanted to make, and this is the importance of a number of events in Alaskan and 20th century Alaskan history. And Morgan and I might hotly argue about the importance of these various events, but to me, I think the Second World War, the attainment of statehood, the Omnibus Act, and the Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971 are four events which not only are they still transforming our lives in a very radical fashion, but will continue to do so. And I think particularly the Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971, one might ask oneself, how did it all come about? And historians have a predilection to go back to the year one, but one could say that probably the Civil Rights Revolution in the 1950s, Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, had a great deal to do with the Settlement Act in 1971, not to speak of the obvious one, and it's the discovery of oil and the frustrations of the oil companies was the land freeze which Stuart Udall imposed on Alaska. The impossibility to get at the resource until some sort of equitable settlement was reached. So I think that what I have been intrigued with in the last few years, in the last 10, 14 years, is the development of self-consciousness amongst various Native groups in Alaska. Tlinkits have always participated, or from very early times at least, participated in Alaskan political life. This was not the case with the other Alaska Native groups. It was the founding of the Tundra Times in 1961. Various groups, Native groups within Alaska, were able to overcome various internal difficulties, disagreements, and pull together. And what I've been, really, I think it's so very interesting is the development of self-consciousness on the parts of various groups, a desire to have their own written languages, for instance, their own histories. And I think that Jim Carey expressed this very well when he talked about the revival which is taking place amongst various native language groups, the desire to have their own language. And I think this, the various native nations, really, which live within Alaska, contribute immensely to the diversity and the richness of Alaskan life. And I think that the groups such as the Old Believers on the Kenai Peninsula are just a further contribution to this diversity. It was suggested once, and perhaps in a facetious fashion, that the circumpolar Eskimos would one day, they already have various relationships. Greenland Eskimos was Alaskan Eskimos, was Canadian Eskimos. Although there are these two great language divisions, that one of these days they will go to the United Nations and secede and form a circumpolar nation, Eskimo circumpolar nation, which would leave us pretty much in a pickle because much of the oil resources are found in the Arctic. So this would be my answer, such as it is, to your question.
Go ahead. Why don't you introduce him? Maybe he has some. Is he here?
Yes, he just came a few minutes ago.
Whatever the impact is, it will depend upon whether the old believers remain intact or whether they are assimilated. And I don't really know whether they have maintained their responsibility or whether they But Mary tells me that there is a teacher from here. More about the old believers.
This is John Jones. We know him well, and he is the head teacher at Anchor Point, and under his wing rests responsibility to a certain extent for the school out of the village. And it took a bit of doing, didn't it, John, to get you here? Would you like to come up here? We had intended to put him on at 3 o'clock anyway, so this is fine. The question came up. I don't know about his interest to that.
I just jotted some notes down as Mary introduced this part, and I think we all share her butterflies, and I think that's because it's important to us. If I ever went into a football game that, well, everyone was important, so I always got butterflies, and I think that's why getting up in front of a group like this, you want to say something that's meaningful, and you don't want it to be just something trivial. I'm not sure I really understand your question, but was it, to what effect do you think that these group of settlements will have as a lasting effect on Alaska? Would you like to restate that, or is that correct?
Excuse me, we should identify. This is Mr. Doe. He is Mr. G.E. out here on the